I think let's get started with the biggest news of the week. We did get a new Karp video today. We got a lot of other topics to get into. I want to play just like 2 minutes of this Karp video. He is talking about his new book, and then I want to talk about the implications of what this book means for investors. So here's a couple minutes of Karp, and then we'll get into it.
Especially learns how to reorganize to build institutions like Palantir. Palantir absorbs the risk of the institution's own set and needed outcomes. If you work back from the clandestine agency or the special forces or a bank or an intelligence service, what is it that that institution seeks to do? And what is the output that would allow it to do that in software production that would both reconcile its core mandate and then deepen and broaden it in a very rapid time manner? The Palantir version of that is, no, we're going to figure out the problem you think that you actually need to solve, and then we're going to build a product you ought to build. How do you fight? With whom do you fight? How much do you value the human life of your citizens? How much do you value the human life of your adversaries? How much are you willing to go out on a limb to fight for your people? We've borrowed from a lot of cultures. Forward deployed engineers are stolen from French restaurants, and in general, like that's where the whole idea came from. So it's like you sit in a restaurant and you're like, why is the food so good? Well, it's because the waiter is an expert in the food and is preparing the food all the way to the end. And if you ask for the craziest, dumbest thing that would blow up the restaurant, they're like, go somewhere else. The German.
So Karp gets into a lot of things in this 50-minute, I guess, little keynote he did with Ted Mabry, the head of global commercial at Palantir. But the broader implication from this is that he's basically starting his book tour, coming up with a new book, The Technological Republic, in mid-February, which is coming up pretty soon. And I'm assuming he's going to be doing a lot more of these keynote presentations, interviews, podcasts, discussing the book. So I want to put an open question to the panel. I have some thoughts on this, and I think this can go in a lot of different ways, but we'll start with you, Dom. What is the implication of this book? It is very rare for a CEO of a company that's still operating to actually write a book. And do you think there is a bigger strategy than Karp just wanting to get this message out in terms of Palantir, the company, being impacted by his message getting this massive distribution via the book?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a shift in the technology landscape with just a new administration, and it's kind of cool now to be supporting and being America first, which it should have always been cool. It should have always been the primary first place to serve. And I think you're starting to see more and more prominent figures like back that thought process. You've seen commentary from lots of different investors, other CEOs saying, yeah, we thought Karp was crazy, but he's actually right. We should be focused on supporting our government and our citizens first, and really trying to make sure that they are getting the best of our technology first. So I really do think it's actually going to get a lot of coverage, and it's going to get more eyes on Palantir even than before. And I look forward. I have the audiobook reserved, ready to go. So yeah, I think it's going to be good.
Amir, what do you think the actual plan is from Karp around writing this book?
You know what? I'm not really sure what the plan is, to be honest. In terms of the investment itself, I don't think it will have any major impact, but we do know that Karp has been present on the global stage. I mean, we are talking decades now. Like all the most important forums in the world, he's always been there. His voice has always been important. Even when Palantir was this tiny player, still, like, the global world felt the need that, well, we need Karp here to speak. But I do believe that it may have some implications in paving a new way in how to win for the technology sector. I mean, he has already created nightmares at for regular C-suites with the whole steak dinner PowerPoint thing. He's actually proving that, well, you ought to actually deliver value if you want to start winning. So I think it might have some broader impact like that. Obviously, I haven't read the book. It comes out in February, I think. So I'm really looking forward to reading it. But in terms of like impacting our investments, I think it's pretty limited. It's all the same things he has always been saying. It's just formulated into a book. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So I'm sure once it's out and we've read it, we'll have more talks about it.
Matt, your thoughts on the impact of this book for Palantir?
I don't necessarily think it's going to have a large impact for Palantir per se, but I think what it's going to do is differentiate Alex from other people. I think what we've seen over the past 4 to 5 years is more retail people have easy access to stocks, as they're so vulnerable and susceptible to listening to anybody and everybody when it comes to stock forward predictions, and we're the best and everyone's trying to promote their stock. But in reality, what they don't have is what Alex Karp has. It's the ingenuity, it's the innovation, the philosophical mind, his cultural and his values that are important, that not only bleed through him, but also bleed into Palantir, and really is what I think has kept Palantir such a big proponent of getting so many of these contracts, building the foundation that they have over the past 20 odd years with the US government, and now bleeding into some of the commercial companies that they've worked with. And so I think, it to me, they do everything in the right direction. They do it to add consistent value. They do it to show that we're here, we're not wavering from our values. And I think it's a little bit of an addition to that. I mean, how many other CEOs that are billionaire co-founders are out there being like, you know what, I also need to write a book, right? I also need to figure out what else I can do to show people that this is the way they should be thinking, this is the way they should be looking, these are the values they should be following, and I'm proud of where I stand. To me, I think most people would at this point have been checked out. They would just say, I don't need to write this book, I'm gonna be on an island, and not necessarily give a flying F. And you see most CEOs that aren't founders do the same. They get to the C-suite, they collect their big $10 million paychecks, and they just sit back and, they do what they need to do, and they have their contracts with the board. But this guy is literally driving the new face of defense within the United States. And so to me, I think it's that much of a difference between them, and you can start to see, what Frank Slootman brought to the industry. Granted, it might not have been specifically defense technology or anything of the like, but what he might have brought in terms of cloud computing and solving big problems versus what Karp has been able to do. And so hopefully people can start to see with books like this, the differentiators between the folks that are at play, and why Alex is sitting at the big table, as Amir kind of put, right? People are really looking to him to lead us into the next wave of defense technology, and as well as technology in general.
I have a question for the group around the book and around Karp in general. Do you think that it's fair to say Palantir and the leadership team there and the culture that they've built? I made some comments about this earlier. In that video, they hint at the culture and what it's like of, hey, we're going to hire the best talent, but then we're going to expect you to just go solve the problem. Like, we're not going to guide you. Like, it's such a unique culture that they've built. It's unreal. And they are so mission focused. I feel like Karp really feels like, and has talked about this for the past couple of years, that we are on the precipice of close to war with multiple facets of other countries. And if we don't get our act together as a country, and especially from a technology perspective, we could find ourselves in a very challenging predicament if we don't keep the dominant spot. And I think that's part of this book, that to make sure that we don't fall behind China. What do you guys think?
We've talked about the structure a lot, and there are a lot of testimonials from past and former and current employees. Like, the structure doesn't really have reins, as you mentioned. So for a lot of people, it's a huge positive because it creates a sense of importance of what you're doing. So when you're an engineer and you don't have someone breathing down your neck, and you have a lot more freedom, you have this sense of what I'm doing is important, and that's what Karp has always been talking about in all the interviews. Like they used to do this series where they like have a one-on-one with employees on their YouTube channel, like short 5-minute video where Karp just stands there awkwardly, you know how it does, like start swaying, but interviews people, and they all pretty much say the same thing, that they feel important working at Palantir. They feel that what they're doing is for an important cause, and of course it requires a very specific type of person that has that drive, that believes in the same values. And he has said like multiple times they've had some great talent that just didn't align with their ideologies, and then they had to be let go. I mean, it's a rough environment, but for the right people, for the right mindset, I think it can be a huge motivational driver to work at Palantir. And we're starting to see the fruit of the labor. I mean, if you look at employee efficiency, Palantir is by like leaps a lot more efficient per employee against all the software peers. I mean, it's not even close. When you do like revenue per employee, I mean, they are massively a lot higher than all the software industry peers. So yeah, I think it's a unique culture, and I believe in it. So
yeah, I think the Karp also said in that 50-minute keynote he did today, he kind of said like we're built to win and we don't tolerate failure. He was critiquing this idea of like people say you lose and you learn from your mistakes and then you can get better. He was like, the only way we can have the substantial government business that we have is we have to literally be 100 times better than the competition. And as a shareholder, I like hearing that, right? Because if your CEO says we're built to win and we do not tolerate failure, that to me equals, all right, the market's going to decide what the valuation is, but the company's going to execute to the best of their ability. And they're doing it in a pretty sophisticated way. In terms of the implications of the book, I agree with you, Dom. The idea of the technological republic is this concept that the West is good. Like if you have to, put the book in a nutshell, it's like Western values matter. We had $100 billion of defense money come from private VCs into defense startups last year. It seems like the rest of the world is trying to find the next Palantir, the next Anduril, and you're getting a lot more money allocated to the ecosystem, which means more people are interested in magnifying and accentuating this idea that Western values are good. And if Palantir's already been embodying those values for the past 20 years, but now they're going mainstream, that's where I think the book makes sense. Because from an investor perspective, the book is just a medium that's a little bit more elite, high class. Like, you write a book, it's more special than a podcast. If that book can become a New York Times bestseller and, potentially go viral, tens of millions of copies, more people are going to know what Palantir is. And more people are going to be like, yeah, I'm tired of all this woke stuff. I'm on the side of the West. Are there any companies that I can actually put my capital behind to support? Oh, Palantir. Here's this book. And then you read it. You kind of fall in love with the idea. Then Karp, very charismatic, doing all these book tours. I think there is a broader message because I don't think a public CEO is wasting their time writing a book to feed their ego of saying they sold 1 million copies. Like, I really do think there is a bigger picture here. Obviously, earnings is going to determine everything. But if he can get that message out there and shape the narrative, then who knows? Maybe you've got politicians saying, hey, we need to spend more money on defense. I read this book and there's a serious issue that's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's characteristics of, you have Karp, you have Elon, you have Jensen, a lot of these guys, these types of CEOs that have really tackled bigger problems than just building a great company that's a great stock and delivers a great product. It's like they're really going after the most impossible problems and betting everything in, and they are able to draw in such talent that is so committed to the mission. That has been something that has just floored me, how they've been able to keep so many people at Palantir. And even if they haven't, because we've seen some great talent leave Palantir, if you've paid attention to LinkedIn, and they've started their own companies, they've joined other companies, but they've taken those concepts and those principles that I'm sure we're going to see a lot in the book and have applied those to their own companies that they've built. And it's quite impressive.
It's kind of like PayPal 2.0, right? The PayPal Mafia kind of feeding ground. And we've talked about that for years on the channel. But I think it's enlightening. You have some really smart people, like you stated, Dom, that really come to work at the company. and they really pushed the delegation of authority down to the lowest level. And I'm not going to dox anybody by saying this. I don't think they would get mad, but just to kind of, but you have conversations with these entry level employees, and it's like they get hired on because they're smart, and then they get asked, well, what do you want to do within the company? Like many companies just hire you, they have a slot for you, you have your box, you sit in that box for a couple of years, and they move you to a different box. It's like really Palantir holds the keys to and says like, where do you want to go? And they give you the key to your kind of future and how you can develop it. Now, there are boundaries, right? Like you stated, you can't just start to go off and build like $1 trillion businesses, and Palantir is going to like fund that. And eventually people want to have their own sort of entrepreneurial kind of mindset, but it really allows them to think intellectually about how to solve these problems and not get burdened by process, which process can help. But when you're dealing with these abstract problems that don't necessarily have linear ways of getting it done as of yet, you really need to think out of the box. You really need to think innovatively. You really need to categorize things in a way that you could think abstract but still remain organized. And that kind of brings it back to the philosophy aspect of what Karp talks about quite often. And then you might be able to put in and deal with a little bit more process. But I think the way that their company is set up allows them to tackle these big problems. And I think that's why they've had the success they've had compared to, I'm not going to bag on Microsoft. Microsoft's a great business, but what they do is they say, hey, this is a way that you can use our software, go for it and see if you can figure out your problems and use our software to figure it out, versus it's a complete opposite mindset with Palantir. It's like, we have a framework that keeps things organized, but we're not going to tell you to put things in a box exactly like how they do with Microsoft Word or with exactly like Excel, right? You can kind of create your own stuff, and VBA allows you to do that to an extent with like Excel and stuff like that. But I don't think it gives you the horsepower or the computing power rather that Palantir would. Anyway.
Yeah, I think the book is going to have a lot of implications, and you guys can pre-order it right now on Amazon, and it'll be out, I think, February 18th.